Hello, everyone, and welcome to Youth Climate Action Panel as part of Take Me Outside Week. We're so excited that you are joining us for this event. Please feel free to share in the chat where you're joining us from today. If you're from a school or organization, also please let us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Rachel, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator for Take Me Outside. I'm joining you from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, and Dakota, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Manitoba, where I live, is also the traditional lands of the Innuit and the Dene. And I'm joined today by Julie, who is also from Take Me Outside and will be supporting this session and highlighting your questions in the chat, and also providing any help that you might need on the back end. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Take Me Outside that we celebrate the diverse environments and people across Turtle Island whose lands are the places, spaces, and teachers for our work. The speakers and presenters this week come from a wide range of nations and places across Turtle Island. We want to begin by acknowledging that outdoor learning recognizes humans as an interconnected part of the natural world and as a part of relationships that have been stewarded since time immemorial by Indigenous peoples who have lived here before colonialism and continue to live and thrive here despite it. We begin with gratitude and the utmost respect for the land and all relations on, above, and within. We offer our gratitude and respect to the many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who continue to protect and share their deep knowledge and relational knowledge to facilitate ongoing relationships with her. Sharing your languages of relationship, reciprocity, respect, and responsibility encourages the heart of outdoor learning. We also acknowledge that the work of truth and reconciliation is a journey of lifelong learning and work. We commit to supporting educators and rising to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee's calls to actions, number 6, 12, and 62 through 66. And this week, as you explore outdoor learning with your learners, we hope that you take time to recognize whose traditional land or territory you live, play, and explore on. Tim Patterson, an Indigenous mentor and hiking guide from Little Nicola Band, says, "It's not just about acknowledging the land or the people of a particular land, but asking what this knowledge and this feeling compels you to do." So throughout the week, we hope that these sessions and speakers inspire educators and learners from all walks of life to head outside and connect to the land. We hope you experience the way the land can love, nurture, and heal. Now, we are super fortunate that this session is going to be moderated by Larissa Crawford. Larissa is a published Indigenous anti-racism and climate justice researcher, policy advisor, and restorative circle keeper with 15 years of experience. She's the founder of Future Ancestor Services and a Next Generation Speakers Bureau representing diverse entrepreneurs responding to the most pressing systemic challenges. Larissa, I would like to make an offering of tobacco to you in gratitude for joining us today and all your work that you have put into helping with this session. It is truly an honor to have you join us today, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us. So I will be popping this in the mail to you following the session.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for such a beautiful opening. Danse, Larissa Crawford Dishne, Caution, Calgary Nimikan, Pimi Fami Penitengwe, Shimpi, Jamaica Nimikan. Bonjour, je m'appelle Larissa Crawford. J'ai une ascendance métisse de Penitengwe, j'ai une ascendance afro-caribéenne de Jamaïque. Hey, I'm Larissa Crawford. I carry Métis ancestry from Penetangwishina, Ontario, and Afro-Caribbean ancestry from Jamaica. And I'm currently calling in from Calgary, so the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda nations, as well as Métis Nation homeland, Region 3. And I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. This is a sick panel, y'all. I'm so happy to see so many of y'all are joining from all across Turtle Island. And we're going to try to make this as usable, as exciting as possible. We have an incredible panel. And what we really want to focus on today is, as a young person, finding your place in environmentalism, finding your speciality, finding the best use of your skills and your capacities and what you're interested in. Overcoming things like imposter syndrome. So like not feeling like you're good enough or qualified enough to do this work. And really looking at and understanding how our identities and lived experiences actually do qualify you as youth to be some of the best people to be doing this work. So we're going to focus on activism. We're going to focus on identity. We're going to focus on really navigating the crises that we're seeing while also holding space for joy, for rest, for pleasure, for our health, so then we can do this work sustainably. And so I don't want to talk too much during this panel because you really want to hear from the activists, the young activists and leaders that we have on this panel. And so I'm going to actually ask them to introduce themselves. And when they're introducing themselves, I've also asked them to consider, how do your lived experiences and identities qualify you as an environmentalist? So this is one of the first questions that they're going to answer as they're introducing themselves. And it's important to note that when we introduce ourselves, it's so important to talk more about, or to talk beyond our jobs or our roles as laborers and students. It's also important to talk about who you are, where you come from, and how that informs what you're doing. And so that's what we're asking these young activists to speak to today. And so I'm going to first ask Karishma to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Larissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Karishma Porwal. I live in Waterloo, Ontario, which is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. Also, Waterloo is within the the tract of the Grand River that's supposed to belong to the Six Nations. It's known as the Haldimand Treaty of 1784, acknowledging that 6 miles on either side of the river is supposed to belong to the Six Nations of the Grand River. That never happened. But I live on this land, try my best to try and honor what we've learned and what we continue to learn from the folks that have lived here for time immemorial. And then to answer Larissa's question around how my lived experience and my identity defines me and defines which is still evolving, defines me, my experience as an activist. I was born in India. That's Hindi is my native tongue. My family, my extended family, my grandmother, she still lives back there. And I lived there for about 4 years. Then my parents moved me to the Middle East, and then they moved me to Europe, and then we moved to Canada. And so something I've struggled with actually is identity for my entire life, really. And trying to understand, I really never had a sense of belonging because I moved so much. And it was difficult to kind of, make friends. It was difficult to call a place home when you move so much. And so that really did define my identity as an activist, because I've always cared about climate, but I could never really attach my care and concern for the planet to a particular place because we've moved so much. And so it became something that was transcendent, something that kind of rose above a specific place. And I tried thinking more about how can we make the planet better for everyone that lives on it, regardless of where they live, for people, for animals, for plants, for wildlife, and for the earth itself, which is why a lot of the times I don't really see myself as a very patriotic person, despite the fact that I have 3 passports. I don't really celebrate any sort of like Independence Days or Canada Days or anything like that, because I've never really associated with anything like that. And I think personally, this is just me speaking for myself, that borders are dumb. And I think that that's also been something that's defined me as an activist, because I'm never going to point fingers at people that live in other places, because that's something I face a lot on the internet. Being a brown woman, being a South Asian woman, I get a lot of comments around like, but there's so many people in India, they're causing so much pollution, and then pointing fingers at different people that live in different parts of the world. I don't think that gets us anywhere. So I've tried to make my activism, my voice, and my content really agnostic of different, I guess, pointing fingers at people and understanding that people can do the best that they can given the circumstances that they have. And also understanding that a lot of the differences we see across different countries in terms of how environmentally friendly people are is, we can't look at that without the context of history and understanding the effects of colonialism and understanding what happened in the past to get people to the place where they are today. And then taking some empathy along the way and trying to bring people together no matter where they're from to build a better planet, because that ends up in better outcomes for us all. So that's something about me, about the fact that I've never really lived in one place, that has informed my activism and kind of shaped me as somebody who creates content and works in the space. And I'm glad that Larissa mentioned, talking about who we are beyond our jobs. I am somebody who is trying to learn watercolor. I've been trying to learn watercolor for a while. I'm somebody that likes to go swimming. But for my job, I do also work at a nonprofit in the climate sector, and I really like it. So that's me. I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Karishma. That was beautiful. And it really, your point on your lived experience and not feeling tied down to a place, and how that has really informed your ability to be empathetic and to really hold space for global communities and your environmentalism is such a beautiful point. And I think if anyone can really relate to that experience, thinking of how does that inform your environmentalism? Because that's something you could put on a resume. That's something you can put on an application, on a cover letter, because that's a really valuable source of a skill and perspective. So thank you so much, Karishma, for highlighting that. Next, let's go to Naia.
Hi everyone, my name is Naia. I use she, they pronouns. I'm originally from Vancouver, which is the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. But now I primarily live in Hamilton, which is on the lands of the Erie, the Neutral, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all of the other panelists. My ancestors are originally from Korea and Great Britain, and my sets of grandparents immigrated to Turtle Islands like 1 or 2 generations ago. And I kind of consider myself like both a student and also a community organizer. When I was in elementary school, the provincial government in BC was cutting funding to education. And so I started getting involved in organizing because I thought that it was important that students and teachers deserved like well-funded and caring educational spaces that met our material needs, our physical needs, what we needed every day, as well as like our emotional needs and our academic needs. And so I kind of got into like activism and organizing through just like being in school and like noticing that things were disappearing, music programs were disappearing, the government was taking away a lot of things that made our lives better. And so from there, I was involved in some gender and housing justice work in high school. Spent a lot of time doing high school clubs, citywide stuff. And then right before I graduated a while ago now, I was involved in the climate strikes that were happening around the world. And then since then, some other climate work and labor work. But the main point is I really don't feel qualified to be an environmentalist, especially when I was first getting involved in climate work. I've never told anyone to recycle. I like being outside, but I've never really thought like that deeply about it. I've never had a special relationship with animals. I mostly cared about people. Nothing that I knew about environmentalism really resonated with me as a younger person, and also even now. But the thing that I have resonated with is that I've always cared about other people, regardless of whether or not I know them in person. And I've also always liked supporting other people to figure out what they're good at and what they like doing. And so I ended up getting involved in climate organizing in high school because of all of these things. I was really worried and like learning about the effects of climate change on migrants and refugees and people around the world, including in my home cities. And I wanted to figure out how to help other people and help other people figure out how they could use their skills and talents and identities to help. So now for me, organizing is about telling stories. I like reading, speaking of non-work things, building relationships with my friends and with my classmates and with my community members and my neighbors, and learning about my ancestors and how they dealt with crises in the past, because I think often we think of climate change in particular as like this big existential crisis, which it definitely is. At the same time, so many of our ancestors have been through generations and generations of hard things before, and they've survived and passed those lessons down to us. And so part of organizing for me is learning who's come before us and how we can pass knowledge on to future generations. And I'll pass it on to Indy.
Oh, that's so Beautiful. Thank you so much, Naia. That point around really looking to the history to understand and position ourselves in space and time to make sure that we don't lose out on those lessons is so beautiful, and just such a great reminder to everyone on the call that what we're going through, a lot of it isn't new. Our ancestors have survived apocalypse after apocalypse after apocalypse. And there's so much learning that can be done from that. So thank you so much, Naia. That was a beautiful introduction. Yeah, Indigo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Indigo. Some people call me Indy. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up in Guelph, Ontario, but I'm also calling in from Hamilton, same place as Naia. And I love this centering of our introduction on not just what we do for work. I'm a student. I go to McMaster University. But also so much more than that, right? And my experience with organizing and activism for me really was at its peak in high school as well. I did a lot in my hometown at a very local level. For me, mostly focusing on municipal government and things that were going on and doing climate work and climate action in my hometown. But for me, a lot of the purpose, I think, and the reason that I got into it and continue to be inspired and involved is just that I, like Naia, I think I've always been a big feeler, and I think for me, it really started when I was in high school on kind of an emotional level. I think often when you're young, you're doing a lot of exploration about your own identity. I'm also mixed and, second or third generation in Canada and Turtle Island, depending on which side we're looking at. And that really makes you look a lot at privilege and what it means to live in land and in community as a settler, and what you can do with that privilege, and caring a lot about other people. And I was somebody who loved nature. I loved animals. I loved being outside. That was a privilege growing up, that I grew up close to a park and with parents who took me outside a lot. So that built a deep care for the world. And so, yeah, my work, I think, really for me actually started from a source of anxiety and a desire to do something and to help and be involved in my local community that had fed me and supported me so much. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to talk to everyone today. I want to leave enough time to get to questions. I don't want to keep going, but yeah, I think for me, local and really community-based efforts have been the things that have really drawn me to this work. And I will pass it back to Larissa.
Perfect. I want to really underscore, Indigo, what you were speaking to in terms of your feeling, and whether that's anxiety, whether now you mentioned care for other people. And I really want to underscore that is such a beautiful source of qualification, because I so often hear older generations coming into youth spaces and telling us we have to be less emotional, telling us we need to separate our emotion from this work. Because they don't see the value and the qualification that actually gives us. For so many generations, professionals have been taught to keep their feelings separate from their work. And a lot of that dehumanization, a lot of that separation has allowed for the climate crisis to progress in the way that it has. And so I think it's really beautiful that we've heard that from every kind of response, is the role that emotion is playing in your climate activism. And I just want to underscore that for everyone listening, how important that is, and for you not to have other people tell you that that's not right, or that there isn't a place for that in this work. Now, Indigo, I want to keep on your stream. You had mentioned kind of at the end of your response the importance of local climate action. And so my first question actually goes back to you. Why is local climate action so important? And how can understanding the history of activism help us see the impact and power of getting involved with our own communities?
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to speak to this. It feels like, yeah, I feel very lucky to get to answer this question. It's so lovely to see where everyone is calling in from. Hello to all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy that Naia actually brought this up in their introduction about this idea of history and looking to history. But I want to start by talking about the local aspect, because it's definitely not the only way to do things. It's just the way that I kind of have gone about it. I'm somebody who finds it really quite overwhelming thinking only on a very macro scale. And for me, I've found that what has really helped is staying really grounded in my work and in my community. And the beautiful thing about working at a local level is that so often there's so many resources, so much support available to you very close by and in ways that are very familiar. And so on like a very practical level, it's really nice to get to work within your community about things that impact the people, who live in community with you. The one thing I want to kind of touch on also, though, is that working at a local level doesn't necessarily mean that you're only focusing on things that impact only your tiny little community. Working at a local level can also involve things that impact the world on a global scale. It's often just making the scope a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit less scary, and that you can, really work on impacts that will impact real people close to you. And then I think a really cool thing about working at a local level too is it also involves, in my opinion, it involved knowing what local was to me too. That included learning about the watershed that I lived on, learning about the land and its history, and the history of activism and activists who had lived in my community, only like 5-10 years before me. And that can be really helpful because we can work from a place of caring about the people and land that we care about and love. I often find when I'm feeling, too anxious or overwhelmed, that's always a great place to start, is to go back to care and to love and responsibility and belonging, and see where you can work from, starting kind of on that closest circle and then moving outwards. And that kind of brings me to the history aspect, where it can be very stressful. This work is scary. It feels very huge. And as we heard from all three panelists in our introductions, it can be hard to feel like you have a place in the work, or knowing where to even start if you want to be involved or make a change, and respond to some of those, nasty feelings of feeling stressed or anxious. And often it's great to look back to what has happened in the past. We can see people using their imagination in other historical movements, whether they're about climate change or not, imagining other ways we could live in this world that aren't oppressive, that aren't as violent. But I think the most important thing is it helps us, if we look really, really close, understand the path of change, how things change over time. Often in history, it's very easy to see just the one leader. They're often the ones whose stories we hear. But it's really cool to look behind the scenes and see how much of the work was done by artists, by people who weren't that one singular spokesperson leader, but who were doing all that work behind the scenes. And so it can be really inspiring to look at history and what people have done in the face of huge, huge, huge challenges and struggle in the past. And also we can learn from them and learn what they did wrong, so that we can make our movements today and our work today that much better. And I'm realizing that's my 5-minute mark. So I'll pass it back to Larissa.
Indy, that was beautiful. And what really stood out to me was knowing what local means to you, and the beauty of when you want to become more grounded, when you want to have a deeper feeling that you can do something, like knowing what local means to you is so important. I think that's like an amazing conversation that so many of these educators and youth can be having in their classrooms, can be having in their groups, is what does local mean to you? And this beauty of localizing, I think you really underscored such an important point, that making sure that our work is responsive to what we know around us, because so often we have climate solutions and in some ways activism being imposed onto communities that don't necessarily always fit into what everyone is saying we need. For example, rural or northern communities have a lot of different needs and circumstances. And oftentimes when we have big cities coming up with climate solutions, they don't always work everywhere. And so I think, Indigo, what you're underscoring around knowing our localities and recognizing that that is making a global impact is so important for us to hear. So thank you so much. Next, I want to go on to Naia. Naia, how do you think people's perceptions of who an environmentalist is or should be impacts the movements? Because this is really important when we start thinking about our place, when we start thinking about if we're qualified enough to be in this movement. So how do you think people's perceptions of who an environmentalist is or should be impacts the movement?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this already in my introduction, and the reason that I talk about it so much is because I think it really underscores like how a movement is able to win or not. When we have like a certain idea about a type of person who cares about the planet, which I was already talking about. But if we don't fit into that box, either because we're not white, our parents don't have extra time or money, we haven't been able to be outside much, we don't live in a place like that gives us access to land, it can be really hard to imagine ourselves being an environmentalist. And I mean, I know that was the case for me at least, but this has like really big implications for the environmental movement and how it looks and how it feels. It often feels really white. It often feels really managerial class. It often feels kind of inaccessible, very urban, very like scaled up, not local, like Indy was saying. And this isn't to discount like any experiences with the environmental movement, because it does show up in this way as like historically white and historically also made up of men who are like trying to conserve the environment rather than think about our relationship with it. But it's also so important to know that we're needed. And that's like a lot of what roots my organizing work, is making sure that everyone knows that we're all needed, and our specific identities and our specific talents are actually the things that will bring us into the movement and help strengthen the movement, as opposed to things we have to leave at the door when we go to a protest or when we go to an organizing meeting. I want to think about all of the ways that who we are and what we want and what we need can help us do environmental work or climate organizing work, rather than can hold us back from it. And so I find it really useful to think about some different questions that maybe classes can also be talking about too, like who are you and what do you like? What are you good at already? How can you use those kinds of skills and talents and ideas to care for the land and the people in your community? It's also really helpful to think about who you like spending time with. Do you have a grandparent that you spend a lot of time with? Do you have a group of friends at school or outside of school in another community that you do a particular activity with? All of those kinds of things can help you figure out how you get involved as like all of you, and not just like the specific part of you that you think best fits environmental work. And I think ultimately it's really important to be grounded in how you feel, as we've been talking about a lot. It's super important to listen to yourself and your body, and be accountable to your community, and take feedback and listen, as well as sort of put yourself forward as a leader. And I think that really shapes the movement that we're trying to build, because it means that like responses to things like climate crisis, like Larissa and Indy were already talking about, will be rooted in what we need and what our communities need, as opposed to, what someone who we don't resonate with thinks that our communities need, or someone who's imposing a certain idea of who we are. Bringing ourselves and all of ourselves to this work can help us both do the work well and also win the things that we know that we need.
I love that you're really highlighting the importance of relationality in this work, because so like how often do we hear about like in environmental spaces when we're talking about climate justice, when we're talking about climate action, how often are we actually talking about our relationships to ourselves, our relationships to each other, our relationships to the environment? And Naia, like you just gave some really great discussion questions, like who are you? What are you good at? What are the skills that you have? And who do you like spending time with? And I think that's really important when navigating. And Indy had mentioned privilege in their introduction. I think that's one of the key aspects of navigating privilege. That's a key aspects of navigating where you are and who you are, to make sure that you are contributing to environmentalism and to climate action in a way that honors yourself, that honors all the strengths that you carry, but that also respects when other people maybe should be speaking or when other people should be leading. And so I think that was a really beautiful response. It was very practical. So thank you, Naia. We're going to continue in this conversation with Karishma. And this has to do with kind of navigating, yes, the movement, but with the movement, and I'd say with the popularity of the movement of environmentalism, we're seeing so many big deals being signed, and we're seeing all these awards and money associated with climate activism. And as beautiful as this can be, it can also generate individualism. It can generate and can really prey on people's egos. And so, Karishma, I want to ask you, because you've so successfully, I think, navigated that tension of making sure that you're uplifting other activists while doing your work and being quite successful, especially on social media. So in climate activism, individualism and ego can sometimes get in the way of collective action. What strategies or approaches do you recommend for overcoming these barriers, especially when working to engage with youth in a meaningful, community-driven environmental work?
Thank you, Larissa, for such a thoughtful question. And I think this is really important because, and Indy spoke to this very in a really articulate way. She mentioned that there's nobody that's kind of the leader, and I would agree with that. I would kind of harken back to what she said around, and this is so alien to many of us because all the stories we're told about heroes and figures that we look up to, it's crazy to think that maybe that just doesn't exist. You know, like maybe in the climate crisis, in this time of where a lot of us feel very existential around, oh my gosh, what is the future going to look like? In this sort of fight, in this battle for our future, there really is nobody holding the flag. And that can be really hard for us to wrap our heads around, especially consider we grow up hearing stories of like Napoleon and Alexander the Great and people on ships. And again, to Naia's point, like these are very white-centered stories, first of all. But first, I think, comes this unlearning of like, there's nobody that holds the flag. Like there's nobody that's spearheading the revolution. It's truly all of us. And I think that it's difficult to do that in a capitalistic world where we are told to center our egos and center our own individual gain. Who's top of my class, or, how are my grades compared to this person? Who gets the gold medal in the race? Who gets silver? I think that sort of hierarchy and sort of like ranking people in terms of like who is the best, who's the leader, who comes next, needs to go away when it comes to the climate crisis. Because truly, and it sounds like corny, but I think that this is how we move towards a better world and we actually create change. Everybody has their own set of strengths that play a unique role in this fight. Everyone, right? Like no matter who you are, you're no more or less important than the next person if you choose to join this movement. And that's also what's so beautiful about it, is that unlike working for like a corporation where you have a manager and your manager has a manager, sure, there's people that will have different responsibilities in the climate crisis and the climate movement. but you're no more or less important than the next person. And I think that's kind of cool, right? There's not many other spaces in today's world where you find something like that. So I think it's something to be celebrated. But there are ways of being and ways of working within a space like that that help you thrive and help others around you thrive as well. So I'd encourage you to ask yourself, what am I good at? What am I not good at that maybe my best friend is really good at, right? What am I not good at that maybe this person that's in my math class is really good at? Or this other person that I know from an after school activity I do is really good at? And sit with those feelings rather than comparing yourself to this person who's better than you in certain things. Celebrate them for it, right? Like, I think there's so much value in having the ability to cherish people for the things that they're good at and better than us at, than envying them. And I think when you get to that point where you're able to cherish someone for the things that they're good at, and things that you might not necessarily be good at, that's when we can start learning about how we can all join hands in the face of something really existential like the climate crisis, and thinking about how we can work together. Because like I said, there's nobody holding the flag. Like, we do all have to work together, respect one another. And then I think one thing that I also want to mention is having empathy for one another is also really important. Knowing that there's always going to be parts to somebody's story that you're not going to hear, that you're not going to understand, and that might lead to certain ways that they're acting, or certain ways that they're behaving, or certain things that they can do or cannot do. So having empathy for people can really help you, one, become a little bit more likable, understand how you can move the movement forward in a way that's really inclusive, and two, just kind of spread kindness, because no one wants to be miserable in the fight against the climate crisis. It's miserable enough knowing that there's leaders that are failing us, so let's not fail each other, and have empathy for each other, knowing that we all are dealing with a different deck of cards, right? So yeah, I think those would be my main points.
Oh, so practical, and such a beautiful extension too of Naia's points of consideration. Like, when we're trying to build like our confidence in our place, like understanding what we're good at, and then when we're trying to build that skill of humility, because humility is a skill. It is a skill that we can work at, and it's a skill that many of us are not very good at, because we're not encouraged to acknowledge kind of, what am I not good at, and not carry guilt or shame because of that. And it's not to say we're asking you to ask yourself this to guilt yourself, but to really see the opportunities for collaboration. Because when we ask and are honest with ourselves about what we aren't good at, what we can't do, then we're better positioned to identify that person's really good at doing this. We can collaborate. We can create space for them. What really stood out was your point around, if you choose to be in this movement. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a really important role if you choose to be in this movement. And I think that's really important, because we're all leaving legacies as like future ancestors, as people who will one day be ancestors. We're all leaving legacies, whether we choose to acknowledge that or not, whether we choose to do something or not. That's part of a legacy we're leaving. And so, Karishma, you really underscored, like, it is a choice. It is an action to be part of this movement. And that comes down to you. That comes down to understanding what we can do within the means and circumstances that we have. And now, that's not to say, though, that we all have equal access to the movement. And we've talked quite a bit about that. But I think even beyond that, we don't all have the same access to community support or family support in doing this work. We don't all have access to rest or free time to do this work. We don't all have access to the internet, to education about these subjects. We don't all have equal access to this. And this can often lead to burnout. This can often lead to guilt, especially surrounding rest, love, and pleasure. Because if we don't have the free time to have fun, to enjoy our hobbies, and we're filling that with climate justice work, climate activism work, then the moments that we do take for rest might feel guilty. We might feel guilty because we're not contributing to our legacies, because we're not contributing to these bigger things. And so that brings me to my last question, which I want the panelists, as we wrap up our panel, to give just really practical 1 or 2 things that you have learned from not honoring your need for rest, joy, and pleasure, especially as an environmental activist, and 1 action that you take to, or like thought process that you use to prioritize rest now. So what's 1 lesson you've learned from not doing that, and what's 1 thing that you do to help you rest, enjoy, and pleasure? And I will start off with Indigo.
Okay, I'll try to go so fast. 1 thing that I have learned from not honoring these needs is just that you can't continue to do this work when you are burnt out, when you're anxious out of your mind, or when, especially I'd say, you feel like you get that sudden feeling that you're in it alone and it's just you by yourself. And that to me was like a real wake-up call. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not going to be able to continue on this way. And so I think something I've learned in what I do now, currently I've been far less involved than I used to be. And I'm at the point where I'm starting to pick those pieces back up again. I took quite a long break, to be honest. For me, a lot of it is taking care of my mental health. And for me, that looks a lot like going outside and spending time in community. And so those are the ways. And then just keeping to remind myself that, it's never a single individual person effort, but that there's a whole community of people and a whole movement of people who, like Karishma said, are choosing to be there. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Beautiful. Karishma.
For me, I think what I've learned from not prioritizing rest and burning out is that I just get grumpy, and that's not fun for anybody. I think that when I'm burning myself out, the bad news on the TV, on social media, it stresses me out more, and I feel more helpless in the face of these big climate events that I'm reading about. And I feel like I go down the spiral of, feeling existential and feeling this sense of doom. And then I, similar to what Indigo mentioned, I just can't go on. Like, I can't do the things that I need to do because I get grumpy, and it just makes me, I kind of alienate myself from, the people around me and things around me that I need to be involved with or want to be involved with even. And so now some boundaries that I've set is sometimes I don't look at the news. Sometimes I don't want to read about what's going on halfway across the world that I can't influence. Of course, it's not that I never do. It's just that I want to, be attuned with myself to understand that this is a day. I'm already having a bad day. I don't need to expose myself to the news and get myself down. Maybe I just need to, similar to Indigo, go outside. I just need to go touch some grass, take a walk, talk to the people that I love in my life. I'll give my grandma a call, and she'll ground me. And it's such a privilege to be able to, chat with family members and friends and have them bring me back down to earth and distract me even sometimes. And that's totally healthy to want to not think about it and just, watch YouTube videos for a while and just recalibrate. Like, that's fully normal. That's something that I do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karishma. Naia.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've learned over time is that feeling grief and feeling overwhelmed aren't negative things. They aren't bad. Those are such valid responses to seeing the world as it is. And to not feel grief, to not feel sad, to not feel overwhelmed, to not feel anxious, those would be weirder responses, and would concern me more about myself and about other people than feeling those things. And so what I try and remember also.
Oh no! Naia, come back to us! Oh no! We'll see. We'll give another couple seconds to see if they reconnect. right as they were saying the the action. Naia, can you unmute yourself? Are you reconnected? Okay, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we just cut off right as you were about to say your action.
My action is that organizing should feel good. We shouldn't just get involved because we feel guilty or overwhelmed or are grieving. And it helps the most when we remember that all of our struggles are connected. Climate organizing is queer liberation, is feminist, is decolonial, is free Palestine, free Congo, free Sudan. All of those things help the struggle continue and make us feel energized for the future.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to everyone who sat in on this conversation. Thank you so much to Indigo, Karishma, Naia for the conversation that we had. I am leaving feeling incredibly inspired by the work that y'all are doing and just with the depth and vulnerability that you've shared today. And I hope y'all do too. I'll pass it back to Rachel and the Take Me Outside team to transition out of this panel. And I hope that y'all have an amazing TMO week and that y'all get time on the land. Thank you.
Awesome. I feel like so inspired by all of you. Like I was like jotting notes down the entire time and just like amazing quotes that I feel like are going to resonate with me like beyond this week. Like I am so blown away by all of you and the work that you're doing and just the thoughtfulness that you brought into this conversation. So I thank you each for taking time to be with us today and sharing with our learners the experiences that have brought you to this conversation today and some ways that hopefully that people can feel inspired to move beyond this conversation. I do want to remind anyone tuning in that we do have a full week of events happening this week as part of Take Me Outside week. Tonight, we do have an educator professional development session all about climate connections, bringing climate change into outdoor learning. That's going to be hosted on Zoom with our partners over at the Outdoor Learning School and Store. Tomorrow is Take Me Outside Day, where we're encouraging all educators to get outside with their learners and spend some time on the land. We have two awesome sessions to celebrate the day tomorrow. We've got Rise Up Indigenous Wellness will be joining us for a grounding opening exercise at the start of the day. And later on, we have Remy Roden, who is going to be doing a nature sing-along with us. I do also want to share some important prompts. We want to know how you're getting outside this week. So feel free to share your photos with us using the hashtag Take Me Outside Day. You can also email them to us at info@takemeoutside. And also right now in the chat, if you're still tuning in, share what's your plan for getting outside today. We'll also be picking some prize winners from this session of people who attended. So those prize winners will be emailed and notified following this session. A special thanks to our prize partners for their generous donations. So the Outdoor Learning School and Store, New Brunswick Environmental Network, and Mountain Equipment Company for supporting us with prizes and things that we can give away. So I thank you again for joining us today. Feel free, if you had something that resonated with you that you're going to take away from this session, please leave that in the chat. Let us know how you're planning to get outside this week, and hopefully we'll see you again this week. But take care for now and goodbye.